The Jefferson County School District makes the tough decision to close 16 schools. Once the largest school district in the state, Jeffco is now down another 5,000 children just since 2019. Declining enrollments, reducing class sizes, diminishing building populations, and making it financially difficult to support popular neighborhood schools. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the conversation. We are looking at a process today for the massive Jefferson County school system that, in fact, many districts all across the country, all across the state of Colorado, are finding themselves replicating. And our guest today is Jeffco School Superintendent Tracy Dorland. We so appreciate your time today, appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this. And I think probably we should begin the broadcast by saying nobody wants to close a school, not the superintendent, not the families, not the kids. It's a process that no one really wants to go through. It's a hard thing.
Yes, Mark, thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here to talk with you today. And you're right, this is the hardest work that a school district will do with its communities, and nobody wants to do it. It's not pleasurable in any way, and it's difficult. It's extremely difficult.
And in fact, this is not something unique to Jefferson County. I think a lot of people may not realize that enrollments are down across the country by many thousands of students. So you're really not alone in this. As I said just a moment ago, this is happening in many places.
It is. It's happening across the nation, and it's happening across our state. I do believe that the scope and scale of what we're dealing with in Jeffco is a great example of what many districts are going to need to be taking on in the coming year or two. And unfortunately, we have not addressed the issue for a long time. We've had declining enrollment in Jeffco for many years. We have about 30,000 fewer school-age students in Jeffco since 2000. The peak of our enrollment was at 2001. And we just, as a district, really need to address this issue, because what's happened is the declining enrollment is spreading us so thin that we have many schools below 220 students, where we end up with situations and having split grade levels where first and second graders are in the same class. We have part-time programming teachers, art, music, and PE, which are so critical to the experience of our students. Struggles staffing hard to fill positions like special education, which is so important. Difficult time providing robust before and after school programming. And so while this work is incredibly difficult, I do believe it's the right work to do, and we need to have the courage to do it.
So you were adapting as best you could until finally you reach a moment that you just can't stretch anymore.
Yes, correct. And as evidenced by the last 2 years in the spring, we had to tackle emergency closures for 2 schools. In the spring of 2021, right as the board was approving my contract and bringing me on board as the superintendent, they were closing Allendale Elementary. And then fast forward to last spring, after our first round of enrollment, we realized that Fitzmaurice Elementary was enrolled below 100 students. And so again, we had another emergency closure. And the emergency closures in the spring are so challenging because it puts families in a position where they do not have the opportunity to be in the front end of the choice process for enrollment of all schools in Jeffco. And it also puts our staff in a very difficult spot because they're not on the front end of our staffing processes. And so the board at the time of the second emergency closure, which was last spring with Fitzmaurice, said to me, enough of this. We all agreed that we need to look at our policy and really identify that this is an issue in Jeffco and address it head on. So they asked for a comprehensive recommendation. And as we began to look at the data, which you can find on our website, it's all published for our entire community to see, we identified elementary schools as the most critical need right now so that we could avoid the emergency closures and avoid this fear of which elementary school is next. Right. And that's part of the reason why our scope is so large.
And each of these schools that is closing has what is called a receiving school that will jump in and accept these new students. So tell me, how does that process work?
Yeah, one of the things that we looked at was, is there a school within 3.5 miles of the closing school that can receive the students? And in most cases, Surprisingly, there's one school who can receive all the students from the closing school and be okay still with capacity and enrollment. But it will also allow then that receiving school to have, if the students choose to go there, to have more resources and provide more robust programming.
So that brings the question, and I want to ask you about the drivers behind all of this in just a moment,
Sure.
but just the mechanics of this first. And that also, I assume, creates a transportation problem maybe for the district. I mean, there's a shortage of bus drivers as it is. So how do you accommodate all of this transferring and mixing and matching?
Yes, so the district will continue to honor its walk distances for transportation. So at elementary, that's 1 mile. If you live further than 1 mile away, you will receive transportation services. And I also know that we've had a struggle with some interrupted transportation services this year, and I acknowledge that that's a huge challenge for our families. In addition to the school consolidations work, we are also working on healthy and equitable start times. So currently in Jeffco, we have over 100 start and end times for our schools, and we have a very committed group of parents and staff who have worked for many years to try to figure out how we can provide for healthy and equitable start times, not just getting the instructional day more consistently so some students aren't receiving hundreds of more minutes of instruction per year than others, but also so our adolescent students at our high schools and middle schools aren't waking up so early because research shows that adolescents learn better later on in the morning. So with that work, we are hoping to provide efficiencies in our transportation services and hopefully do a better job of not having as many interruptions, and that will begin in the 23-24 school year. So we will be honoring our walk distances for transportation services for students with this consolidation work, and we will also be paying attention to busy thoroughfares. One of the things that families have been saying to us as we've started our community engagement conversations is that they're worried about safety. And so we will be also looking at busy thoroughfares and making sure that students who are near those thoroughfares or need to cross them to get to their receiving schools, if the board does approve this, will also receive support through transportation.
Well, that's a lot of moving pieces. I know as a middle schooler and a high school, I tried to convince people that I needed to start school later in the day, but no one listened until now.
Yes.
So I know I have great kids who think that's a great idea. There are people I don't think who realize how big the district is. There's 150 schools in Jeffco, including the charters. They're enormously diverse. They're geographically, many of them just superbly located and culturally very unique, with a lot of motivated teachers who try to lift a lot of these kids. They do such a great job. So I'm just wondering, what is the benchmark? I know that there's a lot of question about why my school and why not this school. There's a lot of those. So what are the benchmarks for closure?
Sure. We have identified the criteria as follows. A school that has less than 220 students and or less than 45% of its building utilization, and there's a receiving school within 3.5 miles. So those are the criteria, and we have, when the board asked me for a comprehensive recommendation, one of the values that we all talked quite a bit about and was important to all of us was that we had clear criteria that was equitably and equally applied to all schools. And so we have established this criteria. We have applied it to the schools across the district, and that's what has resulted in the 16 schools that are being recommended. And as you can imagine, this is an enormous puzzle. As you just outlined, we are a very diverse district with many sites in a large geographic region, lots of differences within communities, and if you move one little variable in one part of town, you have to move another little variable in another part of town, and any sort of puzzle piece, any string you pull can sort of unwind the whole thing. And so we have been very conscientious about having clear and objectionable criteria, and being able to apply that consistently across all sites was really important to us, and that's what has led us to this recommendation.
Do it in an equitable fashion. That was the goal.
Yes.
And in fact, I love it that you've so perfectly characterized this as a constant point of pain for yourself and your teachers and your staffs. And in fact, there's probably more pain coming. Next year, there are some secondary schools that will have to close as well, you think?
We are going to start phase 2 starting in January. We do believe that as this enrollment decline impacts our elementary schools, it will continue to move forward and impact as the students grow in age and grade level, it will impact our secondary schools. And we have secondary schools who have seen drastic declines in enrollment. We have middle schools who are in the 300 or 400 student range, which is small for a middle school here in Jeffco. And we have high schools who are under 1,000 students. And so, the phase 2 work will be different criteria. We will study the data. We will be publishing the same data that's on the district website for elementary schools. We'll be publishing that for secondary schools in January. We'll be doing the same kind of analysis of looking at it really broadly and identifying new criteria for secondary schools. I do believe and am hopeful that phase 2 is more a conversation around programming and choice than it is around closure. That being said, there may be some schools who are closed in phase 2. In addition to the 16 elementary schools for closure and the consolidations with the other schools in this first round, we are also recommending to our board that we engage in a study of choice patterns by families, a boundary study for the district, and a programming study so that we can look at what is it that our families are choosing and why. 46% of families in Jeffco choice out of their boundary school. And we know that that's for a broad range of reasons. It could be everything from, I like the programming in this school, to this school's near my home, or near my work, or near my grandmother's home, and that they're providing before and after school care, or my best friend goes to that school. I mean, we know lots of different reasons just from talking with families, but we really want to ask more specific questions of families and get a better sense of why they're choosing, and then also understand what programs do we have that are attractive to families, and in which parts of town, where do we have gaps, where do we have overlap, and so we're going to be doing that work as well, which I think will help us better understand what families want and how we can be responsive as a school district to their needs.
I do know that the opportunity to choose is very popular for parents. That's something that they all think is a wonderful opportunity for their children. And you're right, a lot of times it's grandma and grandpa who are taking care of kids, nearby the school. But I also know that families will follow friends, that they'll choose a school because their son or their daughter has friends at another school nearby. So I know that choice is a big part of the program. So I know there's a financial piece to all of this too, that the district receives money, there's a per pupil costs, and that there are variables there too. When schools start to lose enrollment, the district actually loses money for education in those schools.
Correct. So we do, as our enrollment declines, our revenue declines, just based on the state model of funding of public ed. That being said, we do take advantage of the state's averaging. So we are allowed to average our enrollment over 5 years, which supports us with their declining enrollment. And we're grateful for that from the state because it helps us ease into it a little bit more and take the time we need with our communities to help them understand why we might need to make some tough decisions to align our resources to our programming and the schools that we're operating. In addition to that, the smaller schools in our community are more costly to operate, and we do subsidize those schools, and we're happy to do that. However, I think the difference in the presentation that we made to the board outlined that in our school with the highest per pupil dollar amount is about $19,000 per student that we're spending in that school, and the elementary school with the lowest per pupil amount was about $13,000. So we have about a $6,000 gap between schools in terms of the amount per pupil that's being funded to that school. Unfortunately, if you were in the $19,000 per kid school and you saw some amazing programming that students were really taking advantage of and it was really beneficial to them, that would be one thing. But what we find in the schools that are more costly to run is actually less robust programming, more part-time staff, oftentimes no or limited before and after school programming, part-time art, music, and PE. My own students went to a small school and they had 4 music teachers in 5 years because it was a part-time position, and anytime they got a music teacher they loved, the next year that music teacher went out and found a full-time position in a school that had a 1.0 position for her or for him, and that just caused my own children to have a turnover of music teachers. They were all wonderful, but it would have been nice to have some consistency, and you can't blame a high-quality teacher for going and being part of a school community. teachers want to be part of one school community, and we are not promising that we'll be able to provide 1.0 staff in every building across the entire system, but we do know that with this recommendation, we will make progress in having more opportunities for staff to be full-time in our buildings and benefiting our students every day,
right,
and not just half the week.
I know when it comes to those special programs, music, arts, language, athletics, those are all big draws for parents. When you have a school staff, can you be pretty nimble in terms of what you decide to offer, and can you broaden curriculums to accommodate populations? I guess that's my question.
Sure. I think that's another thing that's been happening is in our smaller schools, they don't have as much flexibility because with larger enrollment comes economies of scale and more opportunity to think creatively about how you utilize your funds. And so in our small schools, they're often found every year to be coming back to us and saying, I need money for another 0.5 mental health professional. I need to be able to fund an instructional coach, or I need to make a decision between a digital teacher librarian and an instructional coach. And we're gonna have to, pick one or the other instead of we should be having both in our schools to support our students and our staff.
Right. So bigger schools can really be a plus for your child.
They can be, and they can provide more flexibility for families and staff and school leadership to come together and make some decisions about what's most important to us in terms of our programming and our resources.
You might miss your neighborhood school, but you might pick up a lot of educational opportunities in a bigger one. So the numbers show this affects 2,400 kids. Is that correct? And 422 full-time employees. And so the kids all go to nearby schools. That's the plan. But what's the plan for the employees, which I'm only guessing includes teachers and support staff? I'm just wondering, how do you accommodate that move?
Yep, it includes educational support professionals, teachers, and administrators. And this is a challenging piece. So one of the benefits of our community meetings over the last week and a half has just been the opportunity to really lean in and listen. And I have been also visiting every single one of these schools. And I have heard from teachers, and they're nervous, they're frustrated, they're sad because they care so much about their school communities. And we, as I'm listening, I'm bringing back to my team, and my team is out listening as well, and we're really being thoughtful about how do we take care of our staff. Not just our teachers, but our educational support professionals and our principals. Everybody loves their schools. Everybody is doing an amazing job of supporting students in their school. This is not about a staff or their level of efficacy in terms of the commitment they have. It is about their level of efficacy in terms of the resources we're able to provide them so they can be as efficacious as possible. So we are working now on ways to support our staff with internal movement. We will not be posting positions externally as a district for a while because we want to make sure that our 422 staff who are impacted have an opportunity to find their new home and to be matched well with another school. I think there's a lot of question around, but is it really fair to make them interview? And there are some state laws that we're going to follow around making sure that we match teachers and schools together, but we're also going to do it in a way where we support people through the process. And we want to make sure that our Jeffco teachers hear that we care about them, we appreciate their commitment, and we are working on a process to make sure that they can be matched not only to a school that wants them, but honestly, they need an opportunity to go and visit the school that they might be making their new home in. And many teachers have said to me, the reason I'm here is my colleagues and my principal. I mean, teachers love all kids. They'll teach in any school and serve all kids, right? But the place that they really want to be, their principal and their teacher colleagues matter. And so we need our employees to have the opportunity to meet different locations of people and make a good decision for themselves as well. So we're going to work on some supportive ways to make that matching process happen for our teachers. We don't have all the details yet, and of course this decision is not yet made. The board will decide in November, but we want to be ready in November for if it is a yes, they accept the recommendation, we want our staff to be well taken care of.
Everything I read says that teachers are pretty much in short supply right now, so is this a good thing for teachers in Jeffco, or is this going to be a burden for teachers in Jeffco, all of this moving?
Well, for those who are impacted, it feels like a burden, and it is a burden. Nobody wants to move schools if you already love where you are, and I understand that. One of the other things we're doing for teachers is you talked about the teacher staffing shortage. And in particular, we have some categories of positions that are very difficult to staff, where we do have major shortages, especially in the areas of secondary math and secondary science, and special education and mental health. We also have some shortages in the area of expertise around culturally and linguistically diverse education for our English learners, emerging bilingual students. And so we are working with our teachers to say to them, if you'd like to get an endorsement in one of these hard to staff positions, we'll provide the cohort and the program for you. We will pay for it, and at no cost to you, you can receive an endorsement in one of these categories. And then we'll allow you to apply for positions aligned to that endorsement and get you into that position while you're finishing your endorsement. So it's another way we're trying to provide supports to our staff and also support the district in some of the hard to staff positions that we have.
Right.
So we're doing everything we can, and we are open to more ideas about how to be supportive.
Yeah, that's a hard one, I think, for every superintendent.
Yeah.
I know for the little ones, I know for my own kids, changing schools was, fairly traumatic. I told you that they still talk to me about it today, and they're, longtime adults. But I'm wondering, as a professional educator, what advice would you have for parents who maybe are moving really small ones to a new school, and it's kind of a daunting experience for them?
It is daunting, and fortunately or unfortunately, we do have some experience with this with Fitzmaurice and Allendale, and we have some lessons learned. We know that the sooner we can get students into the new building, meeting friends from the new building, teachers from the new building, being on the playground in the new building, that's really helpful. That's been shared with us by families who've gone through this before, and so we're talking to families who have gone through this to make sure that we understand what was helpful for them. The other thing that I would say about this issue is we had a speaker come last spring as we were sort of emerging from the pandemic, and all of our school leaders and district leaders were pretty tired, and we wanted somebody to come and share some inspiration with them. And so we had a speaker come, and one of the things that the speaker talked about was our ability to give our children two things. One is truth, and the other is hope. And I think, as both a parent and an educator, something I would say to our educators and our families who are helping our children through this is be honest with them, be truthful with them. This is no one's fault. We have fewer kids to serve in Jeffco, and so we need to do something about that so that we can make the best schools possible for all of our kids. And that's the real goal here, is to make sure we have the best programming for our students, and we know that that's hard. And that does mean that your school might close, and that's the truth. But the hope is that when you get to your new school, you might have 2 more classrooms of friends to be able to make. And you might have, I would say to my own children, you might have a full-time music and PE teacher, an art teacher. And you might have a paraprofessional in your classroom who's an extra adult for you to get to know. And so you may have some really cool after-school clubs that you might not have access to now. And so I think we also have to be honest with our kids, but also paint the picture of what we're really hoping for is a better school experience for them. So that would be some advice that I'd give.
Parents could help by putting a more positive spin on it. I know for my daughter, it was just a couple of hours. She made new friends and was off and running. But my son will tell me, boys, they're socially just a little more awkward when they're very young, and he had a tougher time of it. But hopefully 2 to 3 weeks is the time frame for everybody to get plugged back in again. According to your numbers, 45% of your families, I think you said 47% of your families, chose not to attend their neighborhood school. So for them, it was about choice, which is a big word for parents. I mean, it comes up whenever you talk to parents. They just love to discuss about discuss the possibilities their child had going to another school. So is that that's probably not a developing trend. That's a developed trend, I would guess.
Yes.
That all your parents are going to when they have the opportunity, they will choose the school that best fits them, and there's a lot of them that will do that.
Yes, and that's part of the reason. It's a state law, and it's been around for a very long time. It's impacting all districts, any that are large enough to have choice. In the state of Colorado, and we believe that that's part of the reason why we need to better understand it and understand the patterns and trends that are driving families to choose, as well as take a look at our boundaries in an era of choice. Our boundary model right now is very traditional. When, that was developed during the baby boom, when we had so many schools built because every household had 5 students and 5 children coming out of it. And so we need to take a look at that, and we need to think about our boundaries in light of school choice and what families really want. One of the goals that, with declining enrollment, you can look at it as, we have declining enrollment, we have fewer students to serve, so therefore we have to deal with the budget, we have to deal with all this. Or you can look at it as, we have fewer students to serve. How will we capture all of the students within our boundary and provide the highest quality educational experience for them?
Right.
There's not a whole lot we can do about the fact that people are having fewer kids. What we can control is that we provide the best educational experience for the students in our communities.
Right. I know a lot of those buildings were built from 46 to 64
Yes.
when I was a kid, and I'm really old, so maybe they really upgrade to a really nice building. So I have to ask you about some of the drivers behind all of this,
Sure.
these declining enrollments. Was it the pandemic? Is it birth rates? Is it just simple geography of people moving to other jobs and taking their families with them? I mean, what's the big driver? What happened?
Yeah.
Because I honestly don't think a lot of parents realized how swiftly this occurred. Am I wrong about that? Were they caught off guard by it? So my questions are, what's driving it, and do you think parents were surprised by it?
Sure. I do think it's driven by all of the above. So I mentioned before, if we look at the 2020 census data, what we learned from that is that we have had since 2000 to 2020 a decline in that 20-year period, a decline of about 30,000 children under the age of 18 and below. And so there are fewer children being born. That's just a fact that we have, and then we have and the state demographer would tell you that as well. In addition to that, during the pandemic exacerbated it. And so we had a drop of 5,000 students during the pandemic that did not return to us. Some of that, we believe, is demographic changes in terms of where families are living. Many moved out to newer homes in growing areas where we aren't growing as much in Jeffco, where newer homes are less expensive to buy. We have rising housing costs in Jeffco as well. And so that we think has had an impact on family movement. I also believe some of the flexibilities in work location and remote work has allowed families to live in different places and make different choices. And then we just know that fewer students are being born. And while we dropped by 30,000 18 and under in Jeffco in the 2020 census, we also grew by 55,000 just overall. And so we know that that's older community members, and they're staying in their homes longer,
right.
Which is a good thing. And at the same time, it's causing us to have fewer students to serve in our schools. So it's a complicated mix. What I will say is that Jeffco had its height of enrollment in 2001. I think I mentioned that before. And we have been declining even before the pandemic. We had very small schools, and we've had one of the most difficult parts of all of this is that Jeffco has had stops and starts with school closures and consolidations in the past. And some of that has been extremely challenging for many in our community in the way the district managed it. Yeah. And some of that trauma and experience and frustration is coming back around.
Right.
And I understand that. And we have taken a lot of steps to understand that history and talk to people who were part of it and understand what happened then, because we want to be smarter today than we were yesterday.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm hoping we're even smarter tomorrow than we are today.
Yeah.
But we are committed to learning through this process. We're committed to learning from the successes and the mistakes of the past, and we're trying really hard to be present with our community and make sure that we don't make the same mistakes that we've made in the past.
Because a lot of them have already moved once, and now they're saying, I'm really curious, did parents, were they surprised by it? Have you heard that? Is it like, what happened?
Yeah, I think the publishing of the data on our website so publicly and transparently helped with people not being surprised. And at the same time, yes, I mean, sometimes it's hard, we're all busy. Raising our families, doing the best we can on a daily basis, and sometimes you just don't know until it's really impacting you directly. And so there were families who were surprised, and I think the data that we've been sharing around the number of school-age children in our community, the decline since the pandemic, The numbers, just sheer numbers of students in some of our buildings, I mean, some of our buildings have 110 students in them. So the data is shocking and surprising to many people.
Yeah, I know. I was really surprised by it. I know the state demographer also says, he believes,
Yes.
superintendents such as yourself, you are awake at night wondering about these marginalized kids, these kids who were struggling before the pandemic, who were struggling before all these other social and economic factors started creating problems for school districts. I know you are concerned about marginalized kids, so how do you reach out? I mean, a lot of them have just disappeared. They essentially have fallen through the cracks. Educators know they're out there, but reaching them is extremely difficult. Am I right about that? It's just that's a tough nut.
It is, and some community members are very concerned because they feel like the recommendation is impacting our at-risk students and families at greater rates than not students who don't qualify for, say, free and reduced lunch in our community. And I understand that concern, and we are concerned about our students who are at risk and our families who need additional supports as well. We have many of our staff members who support those populations of students involved in this project, and making sure that one of the lessons learned from our past is when we have students, say, from a Title I school who receive additional federal dollars based on free and reduced lunch numbers in the school, transitioning to a school that may or may not be Title I in the next year, what supports need to follow them? And that's something that people have said to us they have felt like in the past we didn't do well as a district. So we are really concentrating on that and trying to figure out how we make sure that that happens. The other thing I'll share with you is that from a resource perspective, we do have federal funds that are targeted toward and support free and reduced lunch students. About $10 million a year comes to Jeffco in Title I funding. What we do know is that about 35% of our free and reduced students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, about 35% of them are in Title I schools that get a portion of this $10 million. We have 65% of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch who are not in Title I schools. It's another example of how spread so thin we are, and if the board does approve this consolidation plan in November, what it will allow us to do is look at how we are funding our schools, both with our general fund money from the state and our title funding from the federal government, and really try to target more free and reduced lunch students in fewer schools. And so my hope is that this actually helps us address some of the equity issues that we currently have in Jeffco, where many of our small schools are students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and therefore they are the ones who are having part-time PE, part-time mental health supports, split grade levels where first and second grade is in the same classroom. But I will also say that there are 16 schools on the list, 10 of them are non-title schools, and 6 of them are title schools. And so, they're in 12 different articulation areas. This is an across-the-board issue. It is not just an issue for our at-risk students, it's an issue for all students in Jeffco.
Last question, when I talk to parents, they say, ask the superintendent. Everyone wants to, you have such a great command of the numbers, but they say, ask her what's next. We're closing elementary schools, we're probably going to close some secondary schools next, so what does she see? This is where you get your crystal ball out. What does she think is going to happen to us next? Where's the district headed?
Yeah.
That's a hard question.
It's a hard question, and we have just started implementing a new strategic plan called Jeffco Thrives 2025. And I know people don't want me to rattle off strategies within a strategic plan when you ask me that question, so I'm not going to go into the strategic plan. But I will just talk about the vision that it presents for our community and why this consolidation work is so critical as a major initiative this year. We would like to, in phase 2, begin a conversation about articulation area visions. So we know that the world our students are going to go into after they graduate from us is very different than the world that you and I went into after we got out of high school or even college. It's volatile, it's uncertain, and it's changing rapidly. Technology today will look very different than technology even 2 years from now. And our students need to understand not only content, but also how to operate as a team member in a world like that. And we have some work to do to envision what career-connected learning looks like for students. What does the Jefferson articulation area want to provide for its schools? What does the Arvada articulation area want to provide for its schools? The Chatfield articulation area. And so my hope is that phase 2 allows us to have community-wide conversations, to not just be a conversation around consolidation of our secondary schools, but really visioning for the square footage we have. What can we create for students? Mark, we have over 100 students who are on a wait list for our welding programs.
Oh my goodness, you're kidding.
It's crazy.
Really?
And we would love to expand programs like that. We have many students who are on a wait list for our gaming programs, where they're creating new video games, and it's really computer science pathways. And so we have an opportunity if our community is willing to come to the table and think with us about what do we want for our students in the future. We're wanting to have a conversation around what does High School 2.0 look like, which is a redesign of how do you combine career and technical education with mathematics standards and allow students to get both electives and math credits, and really make the learning relevant for students so that they get up in the morning and want to go to that class,
right.
Because it means something to where they're headed in life.
Good for you. You, Superintendent Dorland, you have a very difficult job.
Yeah.
But I love it. You clearly have a vision for the district going forward. I think that's what a lot of parents are looking for.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. We so appreciate it. And great good luck as well in what's ahead.
Thank you.
All right, Tracy Dorland,
Thanks,
thank
Mark.
you very much. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We will talk again soon.